This week, we present, first up, the security news. We're going to discuss how ransomware is growing at 118%. Cyber criminals adopt fresh tactics and code innovations. Period tracker apps share data with Facebook. Did I read that? Anyway, U.S. Cyber Command trolls North Korea with a malware release, and a whole lot more. How gamification, how I don't buy it at all. A new vulnerability in Intel CPUs. How I have some thoughts on firmware and attack vectors, and I want you to prove me wrong. And all that and more. On our second segment, Peter Smith, the founder and CEO of Edgewise, we'll be talking about some really interesting challenges when it comes to security in AWS and Amazon's AWS cloud. Some really, really interesting stuff. Peter's got some awesome content on it, so I'm excited. We'll then air some pre-recorded interviews from the Social Engineering Village with Chris Kirsch and Mika. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to Logarithm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, Logarithm provides security made smarter. Is your IT team ready to face the next implementation or upgrade? Do you have a pool of talented team members who are trained and ready to support your organization's growth? The right IT skills development platform can get you past the IT skills gap. With training content that's so engaging, some even call it binge-worthy learning, your team will watch and learn more with IT Pro TV. Get a free team trial of IT Pro TV today. Visit securityweekly.com/IT Pro TV. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIEM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
Hello, welcome to Security Weekly. I would like to introduce you to a man whose hat is not nearly as cool as my bald head. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. This is episode 619, being recorded on September 12th, 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios, although most of our hosts, in fact, all of our hosts for this segment right now, are on the lines remotely. Starting with Mr. Lee Neely. Lee, welcome.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here from the home Idaho office. Looking forward to a great show. Cheers.
Fresh off the heels of DerbyCon, you and Mr. Jeff Mann, who's also on the lines remotely. Jeff, welcome.
I am fresh off the heels of a lot of bourbon in Louisville, and DerbyCon was very special, and we have something very special planned for everybody as soon as Mark can get to it, but I know it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, well, I won't spoil it, but we have a lot of footage, and we've been using the word like documentary. I don't know how appropriate that is, but it's fairly appropriate. The opposite of appropriate, rather, is Mr. Joff Thayer, who's with us, very bald.
Oh no, you had that right the first time. I'm just sad that I wasn't there at the last DerbyCon. I actually had a record going. I'd been to every single DerbyCon except this year, so my own fault. But I'm looking forward.
Dude, you could have got a challenge, one of those special challenge coins, and a black badge and all that. No,
I'm looking forward to see the documentary, or the whatever we're calling
We'll call it pseudo documentary for now, in case it doesn't turn out that way. But
the pseudo make me a documentary.
yeah, yes, that too. It's very nerdy. Exciting news about our webcast program. We're partnered with ISC Squared as an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you get 1 CPE credit per webcast. You can go to securityweekly.com/webcast and get all the ones that we're about to do, or /on demand, which takes you to the ones we did. We did the one with Jeff and Steve from Logarithm, and it was really awesome. I'm telling you what, if you're considering putting or using services in the cloud and want to understand the factors that go behind security decisions, this is the webcast for you. Jeff and Steve are both DevOps engineers that put Logarithms, were the primary people putting Logarithms product in the cloud as a SaaS offering. So I learned a ton in this webcast. So what else? That's it for webcasts. Hacker Halted will be in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. Jeff and I will be there presenting. EC Council is also offering a $100 discount to our listeners for the 2-day conference. If you use the discount code HH19SW, you can go to securityweekly.com/hackerhalted as well and register there. And now we're going to do the security news first, which is kind of weird. Normally we do that last, but we're doing it first. So I'll turn it over to our illustrious panel. Is there a story that you would like to start with? I only had 17 stories this week.
Yeah, really.
But
I only had 13. Jeff, did you have one that jumped out at you, or?
Oh, DNS. Oh, God, DNS over HTTPS. What an abysmal thing to do to DNS. Yeah, I want to do that one.
Let's do that one.
So there's a number of reasons I'm not really excited about this. I do understand why, right? Because you don't want people snooping on your DNS queries. So I guess, like Jaffa, you're alluding to, HTTPS is one way that you can accomplish that. Are there other ways to protect your recursive queries, Joff, cryptographically?
Yeah, there's a number of things, right?
I've looked into this before. It's really confusing, and there's a lot of options, but...
Yeah, there is. First of all, you've got to go back and remember historically, and I am channeling Paul Vixie here, who I literally had a conversation with last year at Wild West Hackin' Fest about this very topic. And, to paraphrase Paul for a minute, he was absolutely dismayed at the concept that DNS would be transported over the HTTPS protocol. And one of the reasons is the original design, and this is me speaking now, the original design of DNS is a distributed name system. There is a caching resolver that is close to you on your local network.
Also, UDP, so that it's fast, and
so it's fast.
The protocol on top of UDP, right, takes care of some of the issues you have with a connectionless protocol. So
if you do appropriately have a caching resolver deployed on your network, the leakage of data is much less because you'll only get the first thing it needs in its cache until that TTL expires. And so you're not always transmitting DNS requests out across the internet. You're transporting them just across your local network for the most part.
But my caching server still needs to go out to the internet to get.
It does. It needs to refresh its cache when the TTL expires. There's no doubt about that. So here's the other thing.
Well, wait. Hold on. Go back to that for a second, Joff. Can your caching recursive name server locally use DNSSEC to talk to either the root or other DNS servers to go get those initial queries and cache them? That would be. Is that an appropriate usage?
Well, you're mixing two concepts. Remember, DNSSEC is more about appropriate validation that the correct answer got to the caching server.
Right.
It is not about encryption.
It's not about. It's not about the privacy.
It's an HMAC like mechanism, right?
It's more for integrity, not privacy. Does that sound
correct?
Okay.
Yeah, gotcha. It's more about integrity, not privacy. So Okay, great. But there is a specification for DNS actually over TLS, which few people are aware of.
Oh,
and
no,
that is,
I read about that. Yeah.
yeah, and that is actually opportunistic on behalf of the resolvers. The port number is 953, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And DNS will attempt to negotiate a resolver-to-resolver TLS connection if that is configured and available to it. So, you know, the fact that we are reinventing the protocol and sending it over HTTPS, I think is I just don't see it as a good idea. I mean, it's actually going against the design of the original protocol, and there has already been efforts to appropriately implement TLS into the DNS protocol in the proper way, assuming that you're running a resolver that is geographically near to you. Now, you don't care if your client system is talking to a resolver on your local network. You know, that's right. It. That's local by definition.
But
right?
Now, what I don't understand is this is being talked about as DNS over HTTPS coming to Chrome. But doesn't Chrome make a call to the operating system, or no? Does it?
Normally, Chrome should be resolving DNS against the operating system.
It would have to. I mean, it has to look at my host. Well, I mean, that's not a DNS lookup, but it does look at my host file, for example.
Well, what they're doing is wrecking that stack, right? They're instead nailing up an HTTPS connectivity from the browser off to some DNS resolver, probably at Google.
Right. So they're bypassing my operating system's DNS resolver?
So you know, who's looking at your DNS now? I mean, seriously. I mean, this actually bothers me. I'm not happy about it.
This stinks for a lot of reasons.
It is against the protocol design. And for crap's sake, I will again paraphrase Paul. In fact, I will quote Paul Vixie on this. I asked him, what do you think of Google's resolver at 8.8.8.8? Okay. Paul did not at that time make a disparaging comment about Google. Paul's response to me was, there's a lot of sheep in human DNA. And his response, and I shit you not, was directly aimed at the idea that DNS by design was designed so that you run a local distributed resolver. Right. It is not a centralized protocol. And it just, I'm furious about this entire direction of DNS in general. I think it's a disaster. It should never have happened, and we should stick with the RFCs where DNS can opportunistically negotiate TLS between the resolvers. That's the way to do it correctly, and that's where I'm staying.
There's just too many variables for me in terms of, can it actually make the SSL connection? Does it look into my host file? Does it fall back to regular DNS? And then what about all the other applications on my system? How are they going to be resolving? Like you're saying, Job, DNS is meant to be versatile like that, and it doesn't matter. Like the point is, I get an answer. The how is all those different scenarios that DNS will go through to attempt to resolve the name, on top of what your operating system does in looking in host files and other things, largely which is broken in today's Linux systems.
I totally get the privacy angle, but honestly, you can configure your own stub resolver that forwards to nobody but the root servers, which are anycast routable.
But then my ISP can see that unless I put that resolver. If I put that resolver on Amazon's or somewhere on the internet, right? And then I'm
no. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to put the resolver in your local network and send the caching recursive queries up to the root. Your ISP, if they look at that, they are looking and snooping on your traffic. Sure, that's potentially a problem, right? But you're not sending your DNS queries to a central authority. You're sending it to the roots, which are trusted across the internet.
Right, but they can't snoop on it. And I think that's the point of putting it over HTTPS is so that it can't be snooped.
That's the privacy concern. Yeah. And so, look, why are we not talking about proper DNS over TLS between the caching resolvers? Because that's where the discussion should be.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Sorry, Lee.
The other thing is, didn't a few years ago we went through a lot of trouble with DNS security? You didn't allow port 53 direct out from any old host, or TCP or UDP. You put it to the resolver and the local resolver, and it was a thing that could talk to the internet because there was a lot of bogus crap out there.
That's the right way to do it, Lee.
That's the right way to do it. Here's the other thing. Remember, when you have a centralized resolver on your local network, there's not individual client identification. I mean, I did this for large universities. There was 15 to 20,000 subscribers talking to 2 servers. Okay? Mm-hmm. Those 2 servers were responsible for the DNS resolution. The only thing an outside party knew was what those 2 servers were sending up to the routes, right? If they chose to look. That's the way the thing is designed.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. It does anonymize your internal IP and look like the resolvers are going out to get the answer. That is right. A good point, John.
So this is an abomination. I mean, it just makes me furious.
Yeah.
But
I imagine the troubleshooting of having things not work from the browser and work from the OS or vice versa. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Yes.
It resolves it one way at the OS and another way in the browser.
Yeah, see, that's a disaster alone, even if you don't take the, big sandhill that I just stood on, right? I mean, that's there's no good words, right? Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean you reinvent it badly. I mean, come on.
It's a great quote, Jeff. Jeff, did you want to weigh in?
I was going to ask someone to just play devil's advocate or just at least say, what was the goal? What were they trying to accomplish here? Albeit poorly, according to Jeff.
Yeah, well, I think the goal is privacy, and I think to make it really easy for the average user to configure their browser and or their phone, because there's options that you can put on your smartphones that will basically protect the privacy of your DNS lookups. So if someone were to look at them over the network, it would be encrypted. So they can't see what website you're going to, right?
But you're trading that off. You're trading that off with the data analytics that the provider of the DNS is going to derive from you.
Yes. Right. So conceivably, because of bills that have been rescinded, conceivably they could say, well, people are going to Netflix more so than anywhere else. So guess what? When you use Netflix, you have to pay an extra fee to the ISP and things of that nature. Now, I think a great technical solution to that, if you're concerned about your ISP snooping on you, is to stand up a DNS server somewhere on the internet, create a secure tunnel to it from your ISP to that server on the internet, and then let it do your DNS resolution. And heck, have 2 of them, right? One in Amazon's cloud, one on DigitalOcean or whatever, and do it that way. That way, your traffic is encrypted to your resolver. Your resolver is doing DNS like the world intended, and albeit a little bit of a hack, I think better than just trusting randomly that Google's going to send your DNS traffic over HTTPS. I think we've beat a dead horse. I don't know.
Well, my only comment, you made the statement, and Joff made a similar statement about average, yours is more recent, so it's in my memory banks. The average user can configure his browser, and my first thought is the average user doesn't configure anything.
That's true.
They just use. So, maybe we know better, but is there a benefit if we can all take a deep breath and step back to the real average user that has no idea what we're even talking about, but needs to have some sort of general protection or I don't trust Google or anybody to think that they're being completely altruistic. But
I agree, Jeff. I think there's a level of training in terms of privacy that is separate from security that needs to happen to the general population that may not understand that if you use your cable provider's email and their DNS servers, that there could be potentially some privacy impacts and really interesting things that happen, like when you host your email, for example, and you want to switch ISPs. Well, now your email is there, right? And just basic things. People I talk to are still in that situation.
Right. All right. Horse beaten.
Okay. Well, speaking of user training, so there was this whole article on the gamification and how it can be used to provide a level of awareness and training to your employees. And I tell you what, and this largely comes from Ira Winkler, and Ira and I had a conversation at Layer 8 conference, and I thought it was really, really prolific. In fact, I hope Ira gets a chance to talk more about this. In fact, we should probably bring him on the show to talk about it, because I bring it up every time now we talk about end user education. Basically, it was what I said when we interviewed Chris Hadnagy, is that rather than teaching people to look for things that might be malicious and teaching them what's malicious and what's not, why don't you just create hard and fast rules to prevent the bad after effects from happening if they fall for a phish? Because I believe the attackers are always going to have some new mechanism, some new technique, some new tool, some new tactic, some new script, some new thing that is going to trick a user. And the real way to protect yourself is to put processes in place that say, if whatever situation happens, I do this and not this. Similar to the security guard we were talking about with Chris Hadnagy a couple of weeks ago. So these things that say, well, gamification is the way to do it. The American Psychological Association says competition increases psychological and physiological activation, which prepares employees' minds for increased effort and enables higher performance. And higher performance leads to, get this, higher performance means being better able to detect and thwart security threats. And that's what the statement I have issue with. Just because you have higher performance doesn't mean that your ability to detect whether something is an attack or not has increased. If you don't have that fundamental knowledge, you're not going to detect it. If the attackers are using something different, really higher performance means you're just going to get pwned faster.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, throughout history, if we can go that far, hackers who are often described in the media as sophisticated and using sophisticated attacks, we know that they usually exploit something relatively simple, like, say, weak passwords.
Yep.
And they're also, for the most part, and I know there's always an exception, but for the most part, they're going after targets of opportunity. They find some way to break into something and they go see who's vulnerable to it, and then they see if there's some way they can monetize what they've found. So, the whole idea, I have a problem with gamification, as do you. I don't think security is a game. I think it's a puzzle. It's a big difference. But I also think that, as soon as we train our users to, not do one thing, the hackers, the bad guys will come up with some variation, as you said, that will defeat them. Somewhat of a case in point, I got an email about a week ago, ostensibly from our internal security department, saying we did a recent phishing activity and you clicked on something and now you have to take remedial training. And I don't object to taking remedial training if, in fact, I did click on something, but I'm usually pretty good at catching stuff. And if something got by me, I would like to know about it. So I wrote to
oh, wait, I thought this was going somewhere different. I thought there was a link in the email you had to click on, and that was the fish. Because that would be an awesome fish.
Well, wait for the punchline, Paul. You're getting ahead of yourself. Sorry. I shot an email to the security office and said, "Hey, what was the thing that I clicked on?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Well, we don't have the details, but you should sign up for the training." So yes, in the original email, it had a link to click on to sign up for this remedial training, to which I commented back to my security group, "It's kind of funny that the behavior that you're trying to correct in me, you're encouraging me to do." So I'm kind of like, I'm not clicking on it,
right?
And we'll wait and see what happens. So I tweeted about it anonymous. I was like, I didn't say it. People can connect the dots now if they're listening, but I didn't say it was my own company. And I'm not going to say what the vendor is that we're using. But it just seemed kind of weird that, you're asking me to click on a link because I supposedly clicked on a bad link. That, even if it's not a phish, it just seems like a stupid way to reinforce good behaviors or discourage you from bad behaviors. Just a thought.
Yeah, well, email phishing is difficult in this context, right? Because you can't say never click on a link or never open an attachment. Because even as a security people, we know that sometimes we have to click a link in email and click an attachment. And then it comes down to, well, who do you trust, right? And that's out the window. I think I've
pretty much decided I should just never click on a link again.
Pretty much. I mean, because as Joff will attest to, once you compromise one user in the organization, what if you were to use that account to send phishing emails to other people? Well, then it's coming from, hey, Jeff at Security Weekly, send me an email. Well, I trust Jeff. I'll click the link, the email address, I can check all those things, right?
Right.
It's harder with links. I think file attachments can be solved to a certain extent, right? There's other ways, I think, to more securely share files, and furthermore, not just securely share the files, but trust who's giving you the file. I think we're further along in that technology, would be my assessment. But links are hard, because then once email, so you make the rule like, I'm not going to click an email. That's a bad rule, because someone's going to send it to you in Slack, someone's going to text it to you via SMS, or send it to you via Twitter DM, whatever the case may be, right? LinkedIn. I mean, there's a million different ways to send people messages now. I really think people are sticking with email because it still works, and all their tools are built around email. When that stops working, they're going to start picking these other ways to send people stuff, and they're still going to be successful, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I guess at the end of the day, I think in terms of security awareness for the user workforce at a company, I think there's more to it than just simply teaching them not to click links, or more generically teaching them not to fall for a phishing attack. Or, to be more specific, as you said, the phishing attack, the phishing attempt, whether we come up with a clever variation of the name for it depending on the attack platform, but it can come from anywhere.
Right.
I just think there's more to it to that, which is probably goes to what Ira and Chris are saying about, why don't we redirect things to the more positive behaviors and the absolutes that will prevent, the bad things from happening, rather than sort of focusing on the negative elements of it. I am curious to hear what Ira has to say about it, so let's get him on the show.
Absolutely.
I think the other one
go ahead,
thing
Jeff.
Just as a last comment on that, all of us are susceptible, right? I love clicking on shit. Send me the right stuff, I'll click on it.
Right.
I mean, it's a trust issue, and trust can be exploited.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. So, Joff, you trust me to click. I put a link in Slack earlier. You probably clicked on it, right? Because you thought it came from me. But that's not the point. Joff and I will trust each other, right? But what if Joff's not really Joff? Or what if someone's impersonating Joff? That's the real, I think, one of the real problems with all of this is how do you verify the identity, and how do you know who is trustworthy? But not who, but if you can trust that identity at that particular time.
Yeah.
How much do you trust CVSS? Any comments on CVSS?
Ooh. That could get deep. I mean, we were
version 2 or version 3?
But, okay.
Well, Gunter Alleman wrote an article this week about CVSS, and basically it can be summarized as what we've always said about CVSS, right? He says, I would caution any bug hunter, security analyst, software vendor, or device manufacturer to not rely on CVSS as the pointy end of the stick for prioritizing remediation. It is an important variable in the risk calculation, but it is not an adequate risk qualifier by itself. I think he summed it up very nicely.
But does he go on to say what is? Because, again, lacking any other resource, and I'm curious as to whether he was referring to version 2 or version 3. But a lot of people don't have anything else to work with. But I think more than anything, this is sort of a recent trend, and we know some of the other companies that are doing this. We've found all the vulnerabilities, and I've seen the statistics. I can't quote them exactly, but something like 85% of the vulnerabilities out there score on the CVSS ranking. Whatever the number is, that means they got to do something about it based on, how far into the show did we get before I said PCI?
Well, I think, Jeff, it comes down for me that what CVSS lacks in terms of what in your own organization and what you're missing, right? And if you're saying that organizations don't have anything else, they haven't created the process to do that, because it's not something else you need per se. It is
well, in a word, it needs context.
It needs
that's the word.
Is it two things? Is it probability and impact that it's missing related to your own organization, or those can't be the only two things? Those are the two things that come to mind. But I think probability and impact. Use kind of is it fair that is the risk assessment?
Probability and impact pertain to the risk. The vulnerability is the vulnerability, and I think part of the confusion is we try to complicate this thing by trying to simplify it too much. If that makes sense.
Does the CVSS score even matter if I have a method for measuring probability and impact? If it's a CVSS 1.0, it could still be a very high probability and have a very severe impact, right? So in that context, CVSS means nothing to me if I can do probability and impact.
Right. It all comes down to local context, and that's what's missing, right? I mean, it's nice to have a base measure that gives a place as a starting point, right? But that's really all it is. It's the rest is a local context, local impact, and organizations, either have their act together on that or they don't. And we see people that are all over the map. Some understand the assets they're dealing with, understand that the risks that they're prioritizing against, and have a very good matrix that takes CVSS into account, but it doesn't treat it as the primary score.
Yeah, I think ease of exploitability is a good thing that CVSS helps define, but you still have to extrapolate into probability and impact. Lee?
Well, I was going to say, you remember when they had all the hubbub about vulnerabilities in medical devices, and then it all calmed down because you had to be like 2 feet from a person. That doesn't mean it's not an unfortunate exploit, but you're not exploiting that from across the pond. You've got to be right next to somebody to do something. Or, in the context of your company, you have a hugely vulnerable system, but you've built firewalls and other devices and segmented it and all this stuff that it's still vulnerable, but you need that context.
Right.
And I just look at the score by itself. Doesn't work.
It's interesting you say that, Lee, because the Logitech keyboard ones, actually Sam told me about this one, that you can basically hack into wireless keyboards that in turn can execute commands on your system. And they said, well, they can do that, remotely, and they don't need an internet connection. They just need to be in range. And I'm like, well, isn't it more of a probability that you're going to be attacked if you're connected to the internet than not? Because that means someone has to be in physical proximity. Now, what I will say is some of the most interesting, specifically wireless attacks that I really have not seen, certainly at any scale. When we were writing the book and doing threat modeling and brainstorming, I was always like, it'd be really interesting if we took this Logitech keyboard attack, right? And we said, well, someone has to physically be there. And I'm like, well, someone doesn't necessarily need to physically be there. Someone just needs to have control of a device with the right hardware and software on it to be able to exploit the vulnerability. And I always thought that one of the coolest vulnerabilities and attacks you could ever construct would be if you took something ubiquitous and off the shelf, like a Windows laptop with even a certain chipset of Wi-Fi, and you could turn that into something malicious that could attack something like a keyboard or attack something like an access point or attack something wirelessly. Now you've just really opened up the attack surface. I think we benefit from the ubiquitous nature of technology and computing in that those attacks are much less feasible because of that. And so it was Dan Kaminsky, right, that did the work about, what was it called, where monolithic, versus ubiquitous computing, right? Because there's different versions of technology, we largely can't pull off those attacks at scale. But I truly believe that that's coming at some point on some scale.
So I think I can summarize what's wrong with this article up in the second paragraph, where the statement is the security industry has always struggled to score, in quotes, the significance of the threat posed by a newly discovered vulnerability. Threats are something else. Vulnerabilities are something else. I think what they're trying to say is more like, the impact or the probability or the likelihood. I think that's what they're trying to say. But when you start throwing these terms together, trying to simplify these things, I think that's where people go off. I don't see anywhere in the article where he suggests the alternative, which is fine. If you have a problem with CVSS, great. To finish my earlier thought, I think a lot of the vulnerability companies are struggling with, we've discovered all these thousands and millions of vulnerabilities, and now we've got, what this article cites, bug bounty programs that are finding so many more vulnerabilities. And there was some conversation I overheard over this past weekend at DerbyCon about some of the dollars that were dropped on bug bounties in Vegas, I guess during DEF CON. And, people are like, yeah, there was a vulnerability, but it wasn't that big a deal. I'm paraphrasing grossly.
See, now I think this attack is what I described, though. Mm-hmm. It sounds like that he can infect a system through some other means, then use the Logitech wireless chipset to then infect and snoop on keyboard strokes of other Logitech wireless keyboards that are vulnerable. Because the dongle, like a USB dongle that's plugged into your computer, what they described in the article is like basically it's got like a mini kind of maybe not operating system, but at least a system on a chip that you can control and take over to use to infect other things. That to me is really cool because it really changes how you would evaluate that vulnerability, that threat, that type of attack against your organization, right? Because it opens up more of the attack surface.
Well, we should have a separate section on, or a separate discussion on the risk equation sometime, and try to drill down on this. I hear what you're saying. Back when I first learned risk equations back in the DoD, to your point, talking about the probability or the impact, we looked at it in two different ways. The probability that an attack would be launched. Mm-hmm. We called them attacks back then, that would actually be attempted. And then the probability or the likelihood that if launched, it would be successful. And very often,
I agree.
If somebody could get to it and try it, it would be completely successful. So a lot of emphasis and weight was placed on the likelihood or the probability that somebody could actually get to the point where they could do the exploitation. I think that's sort of what you're touching on.
I agree, Jeff, that probability and impact are very multidimensional, right? There's a lot of different factors that go into each one of those categories.
But again, if not using the CVSS, what's somebody supposed to use or rely on?
Well, I think it's how you use the CVSS, right?
Exactly.
Use that to.
That was actually a point I was going to make. I've gotten data calls where it's like, for this system, how many vulnerabilities CVSS score of 8 and above have been around for more than 30 days? And it's like, well, yeah, but where's the context of whether they matter? You're just asking for how many I got. But that's a compliance mindset, right?
And there's so many statistics out there about, well, vulnerabilities that are X number of days old are either exploited or not exploited, and breaches happen, and historically and all that stuff. But that's still someone else's data that they're like, it's not you, right? So to look at age and then look at the data that's been collected about breaches, for example, and apply that to, well, I don't need to fix things that are less than 30 days old because according to statistics, they're not exploited, right, as often or whatever. I agree. I think that's bad practice. It's bad practice. I actually think in this case that you should just patch stuff and have a process for patching stuff. Not worry about doing all the fancy analytics. Being like, there's a patch available. Let's just apply it and move forward. And I truly believe applying that
easier said than done in the enterprise.
Right.
So I found a sentence towards the end that I do agree with, and I think sums up where he's going, and I would agree with it, except for I think I know what he's saying. I'm not sure if it's clearly stated. And the sentence is simply, CVSS isn't and should never be used as a risk score. And what I hear him saying is people see the CVSS score, as a result of the scan engine, and they act upon it without applying any of the other things that we've been talking about, like probability or impact, which is basically assigning risk.
Right.
Where is the device or system in question in your network? Is this an internet exploitable, remotely exploitable vulnerability that's sitting on a system that's 20 layers deep in your network and only 2 people have access to it? Those are the types of things that people too often have just taken the raw score or whatever the score is from scan engines and acted upon it without applying any kind of, what does this mean to my environment? What does this mean to the systems in my environment? And I think that's what's missing, and I think that's what we're all agreeing on, including the author or the person that they...
But I think using in the context of scanning is important, because you may see this really high severity vulnerability in RDP, look at the systems you know about and go, I use largely Linux systems, and the Windows systems I have are all either not vulnerable or not running RDP, so I'm good. However, in your scanning engine, the high CVSS score that's exploiting Bluekeep, did I get that right? Is it Bluekeep?
It's Bluekeep.
Bluekeep, right? If that does appear in my network, then it's a high priority, right? And so your scanning engine should absolutely use CVSS for things like that.
Well, pulling the Bluekeep thread for a second, I mean, my number 6 is basically that up until just recently, there wasn't a published exploit for Bluekeep, so the risk of exploit was much lower. Now there's a Metasploit framework has a Bluekeep exploit, so it changes the need and nature of patching Bluekeep. I mean, I don't want to pull the why have you got that exposed to the network or why is it on when it doesn't have to be. I'm just saying it changes the risk model around.
Well, and that exploit in Metasploit is somewhat neutered in a couple of different ways.
But yeah, okay. But
for good reason. I'm not. I think Rapid7 and the Metasploit team are being both responsible and allowing researchers to do their research, and people who want to test for the vulnerability. Right? They're trying to get the best of both worlds, and so I get it. And they're also quoted as stating that they're not going to necessarily leave it in the state that it's in today, which requires some knowledge and or skill depending on what your goals are and what targets you have. They're not going to leave it that way forever. They're like, this, if that's the way it is for now, that might change. We might essentially make it easier for people to use this exploit down the road.
That's your degree of exploitability, right? I mean, how easily can it be exploited? What's it take? That's part of the equation in terms of how much you care about a given vulnerability.
I completely agree. I think ease of exploitability absolutely plays a factor in the equation, which is a hard thing to measure sometimes too.
So, meanwhile, back at the ranch, NSA, trying to keep up with cybersecurity initiatives, has engaged in a reorganization. My article number 5. I won't dwell on it, but I can't tell you how many reorgs I lived through in the mere 10 years I was there.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah, that's...
Hey, can we talk about the Netcat story? Because that thing makes me really laugh out loud.
Sure.
Yeah, it's short for network cache attack. It's a side channel vulnerability that could allow users to sniff out sensitive data, and they quote, such as someone's SSH password. Although from reading the article, it looks like going back to ease of exploitability, that it's very opportunistic and therefore got a pretty low severity rating. But Intel's recommendation for disabling performance optimization features also has me very worried, mostly because I write really crappy code and I need all the help I can get to make my apps run fast.
Yeah, but really to the point, who the heck would name their exploit Netcat, for fuck's sake?
Oh, yeah, and then there's that.
Come on.
Well, how about NC for short?
Oh, that's a great idea, Jeff.
That's unique.
Yeah, there's a little bit of name collision there going on. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here I always thought that referred to Norton Commander, but no.
Look, I'm going to give them a break. Maybe it's lost in translation. After all, they were in Aston.
Right. My story number 5 I thought was interesting. I pulled a quote out from an article that was titled "Firmware: A New Attack Vector requiring industry leadership, which piqued my interest. They state in the article, the emergence of firmware as a new attack vector has reignited an age-old debate within the industry. Who is responsible for addressing device cybersecurity? Is the device manufacturer or the company purchasing the device? The chicken and egg problem, blah, blah, blah. Now, first, firmware attacks are not a new attack vector by any stretch of the imagination. Second, the device manufacturer absolutely must be held responsible, at least in some capacity. It's their device, their product, largely their software. I mean, they could be using other people's software, but so they have some responsibility, if not a lot of responsibility. Third, just as we would purchase software as a company and do our due diligence to make sure that it meets our requirements, which should include security, you are also responsible for discovering any vulnerabilities, backdoors, or misconfigurations that also apply to your firmware. Why is that any different from anything else, right? Prove me wrong.
You remember when firmware updates used to be difficult? You had to do things like put jumpers on the motherboard and or basically boot off of something instead of updating, and now you can kind of just update them in line with your OS patches.
Yeah,
that
but
worries me a little bit,
funny
that
though?
Makes it easy to put bogus stuff in there.
Yeah, you know what's funny? That opens up a whole new attack vector, which I guess, I don't know if the article went on. I didn't see in the article where it explained this, but Lee, to your point, let's take motherboards, for example. Before UEFI, and long before lots of other BIOS versions and revisions, your BIOS update was a bootable DOS floppy, right? That you had to boot your system off of, and then it would go and use that software to update your operating system, and then you took that floppy out and rebooted your system, and you were off to the races. And that's how a BIOS firmware, anyway, back in the day was updated. Now, today, with UEFI, and so many manufacturers, and Eclipsium does great research on this, and I briefed with Lenovo on this as well. Now, today, it's all connected, right? So the operating system itself, to your point, Lee, you don't have to boot in the floppy anymore. That means the operating system has direct access to the firmware, hardware, and firmware that's running on it, and can access it. But it's a lot of cases, it's a two-way street, right? I can write to that firmware can write to the operating system, and therefore it's increasingly becoming, I think, more of a serious problem and an attack vector. Although nothing certainly new. I mean, the early viruses, right, would overwrite your master boot record and corrupt your system. So, it's always been that's always been in play, I guess I should say.
Now
Jeff,
they just send you a bill for the present. Oh, wait, that's called ransom. Yeah.
Yes. Jeff, you got floppies.
I got floppies. Somebody mentioned floppies. This one right here is labeled Satan 1.0, released 4/5/95.
That's awesome.
I can't read it, but I've got it.
I mean, I hate to be nitpicky. It doesn't look very floppy to me. It looks kind of hard. So,
right?
I mean, I actually have people.
He's just glad to see us.
I actually
that begs the question: do I have any floppy disks?
Wait,
I think
Jeff,
they're all these.
Jeff, are you going to say people don't know what this little save icon means?
Right.
Because that makes me feel really old when they say that.
But wait,
I've
close up.
I've got lots of stories, but
what does this do?
That's the right. That's the right. That's the right protector.
Right protect. Everybody knows that.
Not everybody.
Okay.
Hey,
what's the other hole for? Do you remember?
Paul, I'll let you take that one.
I had that was.
Hold on. Now, in all seriousness,
oh God.
In all seriousness, what did that other hole signify? Because it was either open or closed, right?
Well,
if I remember correctly.
So there was a write protect tab on one side, and the other side I thought was for the high density floppies that had that extra hole. That one.
That's the high density floppy sensor hole.
3 megs versus 1.4.
Okay. Yes.
Now I got to look at all my floppies and see if they have a second hole. Oh wait, there's one without.
There you go.
There you go. That's a low density.
Or is it 720K versus 1.4? 720K versus 1.4 megabytes. That's right.
That's right.
Wow, that's not a lot.
Right.
Why do we know this stuff?
That was awesome, Lee. I if I knew that, I forgot it, or maybe never knew it. Maybe my floppies only had holes. I don't know.
I'll never.
I'm waiting for Jeff to
never
pull out a
forget,
flippy
though, I have to
floppy.
I have to tell a floppy story.
A floppy story. And we have a title for the episode. Thank you, Joff.
Bottoms up.
Floppy story.
Floppy story. No,
Floppy story.
My favorite floppy story. By the way, okay, completely.
Wait, you have more than one floppy story.
A completely ADD moment. I've got my Star Trek glass here.
Very nerdy.
Oh,
Nice.
baby.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not fucking around.
Is it the voyage home where they go back in time
Yeah, I think it is.
with the whales and
it's
stuff? That was
movie.
on TV the other morning. I had that kind of on in the
And
background.
they've got this big ass tank. inside the
Yeah.
ship.
That's
And
Star
Scotty's
Trek
going, hello,
4, I
computer to the mouse.
Yeah, with
I'm
the
out.
computer.
Oh, wait. Hello, computer.
That
Yeah.
was a classic.
Classic.
Okay, no, I
Anyway.
gotta tell my floppy story now. All right, I had so years ago I used to be, and I'm talking years ago, I used to be a consultant for faculty and students, and Paul's probably had this role as well. But anyway, one lovely young lady, and I always enjoyed it when lovely young ladies came to see me, for unknown reasons. But one one lovely young lady came in one day and she pulled out her little purse. She had one of those really cute pocketbooks and, anyway, she pulled out her floppy disk from her purse. And when she pulled it out, it was a 5 1/4. We're not talking a 3.5 inch days. Okay. It was a 5 1/4. And
It was
she
just
pulled it out.
excited to see you, Jeff.
She pulled it out and the thing is curved like this, right? And on the label, it was beautifully typewritten. and she says to me, I don't know why it's not working. Can you fix it? Anyway, that's my floppy story.
She put it through the typewriter, didn't she?
Totally put it
She
through the
put it
typewriter.
through the typewrtor.
Oh,
God.
Yeah.
well,
I
Sean,
don't-
as long as she didn't touch the little pill circle thing, she's all right, right?
Yeah. Look, full disclosure, I had stupid guys do stupid shit too. So
Yeah.
just to keep it equal opportunity here. But
Yeah, they tried to put these in the typewriter. Figure that
Yeah,
one out.
Right.
I did have a guy. I'll tell you, I had a guy come in, same thing, 5 1/4. He pulls it out of his back pocket and it's folded neatly into 4 pieces, and he was wondering why it wasn't working. Yeah.
Oh,
You know the
Hey.
shelf on the in the car behind the back seats that used to exist anyway for the coupes? You know that
Yeah.
is not a good place to store 9-track tapes in the sun?
Yeah, they tend to melt, don't they?
Yeah, I found that out. It was sad.
Oh, I had one. I think for Jeff that he'll get a kick out of because he likes to poke at Bruce Schneier. I think you've come full circle, but
I
InfoSec
still poke at them.
InfoSec prophet Bruce Schneier is only as famous as half of Salt and Peppa. Salt and Peppa being the female rap group from the 90s. Push it real good. Yeah. So apparently they put together a list of popularity and there's security people on it. I don't know the whole thing. Redskins
It was
list.
based on Google search records or something like that.
Something
Not
ridiculous.
That they're tracking what we search for.
Numbers 4 and 5 apparently on the list are Bruce Schneier and Troy Hunt, respectively, who rank alongside Sandra Denton, Peppa from the 1980s hip-hop duo Salt and Peppa, and English football player Lucy Bronze. Apparently plays French club or something.
Well, hey, I added this one just because I remembered it just like 10 minutes ago, so I added it if you refresh. But a couple of our own got shout outs in the article that I posted about Google is finally going to fix a problem that they had with their calendar that was discovered by a couple Black Hills folks back in 2017.
Oh, nice.
We got
That
some
would be
press.
Mike Felch and
Mike
Bo
Felch and
Bullock.
Bo Bullock. We got some press over that, which is pretty
Yeah.
awesome. And we had to give Mike and Bo, appropriate, spankings or something. I don't know what we gave.
Yep,
But
Cool.
Oh, yeah. Lee, you had a tampon or period store. Was it period like
Yeah.
menstruation period? Is that what you're talking about?
So there are these mobile apps that are designed to track health things. This particular one was a period tracker. It was designed to track menstruation cycles and fertility. And it collected a lot of biometric data. which you can make a big data set from a bunch of users and then predict trends. That part, okay, but they were sharing that data with Facebook. So, Jane Doe is going to be fertile today, is available on social media, or maybe even more sexual facts. They weren't sharing social security numbers. It was just kind of weird that they were doing that. I mean, the message is when you're tracking health information, be sure where that app is storing it.
So, like, it updated your status, like, is feeling fertile today? Is that
pretty much? I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, I could definitely see, building a big,
we know exactly what they were thinking.
But holy crap.
I mean, that could be useful. Is feeling grumpy today, right? That would be.
Keep Mr. Happy away.
It's the day to bring home chocolate and flowers. Yep.
Yes.
Oh, that would be worth it for. Never mind. Yes.
My wife, who thinks what we do is silly and doesn't have anything to do with this, she saw that on Facebook and was talking about it. So it made the real news.
Mm.
Yeah, and you said, you think what we do is silly?
Well,
I mean,
if you want to get silly, we could talk about XKCD.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I mean, it's really unfortunate their forum lost 560,000 accounts. What got mine is that somebody did an analysis. Number one password in the dump was password, and number two is correct battery horse staple. You remember the KCD commercial? Use the passphrase.
Oh, that was
I tell people use the passphrase, but never use correct battery horse staple.
How Freudian or not?
Well, I guess correct battery horse staple one would be okay, right, John?
Yeah. Is that a trick question?
I think that was a trick question.
I knew I'd get a laugh out of him. That's why I asked it. So I just thought that was a little bit on the light side that, they got hacked and that actual combination was in the data dump. I was like, wow.
I absolutely
That's crazy.
Hey, +1 password length.
On the absolute lightest note, if I can close this out with one more story, just to encourage everyone to tune into HGTV. I don't know how many weeks the series is running, but HGTV went out and bought the real Brady Bunch house that was used at the beginning of the show, just an aerial exterior view, and they have reconstructed it and refurbished it to actually look like the real Brady Bunch house on the inside, which was just a series of sound stages 50 years ago when I used to watch it on TV.
Right? That's a pretty cool hack. I mean, that is kind of like a hack, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very cool hack.
Marsha. There's some cool photos in this article, by the way. It looks very familiar.
But now what's interesting, though, is when we talked about passwords a moment ago, on not so light of a note, how a nearly forgotten physicist shaped your internet access. Dr. Corbato recently just passed away at the age of 93, and created in the 1950s, according to the article. Lee and Jeff, you may remember, you were probably out of college by then, but he says, with multiple users sharing one computer, in the first multi-user operating system, it sounds like they were describing, files had to be assigned to individual resources, researchers, and only available to them. That led Dr. Corbato to develop the password system, in a system now familiar to everyone. Every user was given a unique name and a password, and their files were stored in a way they're available to only that user. That was in the 50s.
Wow, Marsha Brady did not age well. Sorry, I had to say that.
Well, she's like 62 years old.
3.
So Dr. Corbato's solution was to develop an operating system called the Compatible Time Sharing System, or CTSS.
Paul, but seriously, find a picture of Jan Brady and tell me if you don't think she looks like Cindy Gula.
Okay. All right, we'll do that on the break. How's that?
Okay. All right.
And with that, we'll take a short break and come back with our in-studio interview with Peter Smith from Edgewise. Stay tuned.